Okay, hello everybody. Thank you for logging into our webinar today on your Saturday. Hopefully everybody's staying cool. I know it's getting quite warm. So today's webinar, we're going to cover drip basics. So we're going to go over all the components that are in a drip irrigation system, cover design, install, and then maintenance, as well as an irrigation schedule at the end. So normally we host these at the WaterWise Community Center, and I'm able to see everybody's faces. But since we're not able to do that, what I'm going to do is launch our first poll, kind of get an idea of who's on the call, and know a little bit more about people. So I'm going to go ahead and launch the first poll. So please take your time and answer these questions, and we'll get a sense of who's on this call with us. And then always a PDF of this PowerPoint, so you don't necessarily need to make a bunch of notes, but in case you want to see the PowerPoint, we'll have a PDF available at cbwcd.org/presentations. So going to our website, you won't be able to find this webpage, so you need to do the /presentations. There you'll find PDFs of this PowerPoint, as well as all the other presentations that we've done on the webinar platform. And then also we're at YouTube Live. So right now we're live streaming. So if you go to cbwcd.org/YouTube, that will send you to our page. So you'll be able to rewatch this webinar as well. Okay, thank you everybody. Seems like most people are answering these polls. I'm going to give it a couple more seconds, and then we'll see what our results are. Okay, looks like most people. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. Thank you all very much. So let's see what we got here. So how many people are watching with you today? Majority is just me. That's typical. So we have a couple. So one actually is me and 3 other or more people. So wow, thank you all for huddling around the computer screen this morning. Have we participated in workshops or programs? No. So no, this is their first time. Thank you for logging in with us today. And then also thank you for the people that are returning. And then, wow, we have other people that are not in our local area. So yeah, please in the chat, if you could tell us where you're at. We're always interested in who's logging in. So great. Stop sharing. And so with that, actually, let me do a little bit of housekeeping. So if this is your first time on Zoom or your first interactive webinar, we have a chat function as well as a Q&A. So with me today and also co-presenting is Daniel Morano, and he's going to be covering the Q&A and chat. So it seems like we're pretty active on the chat right now. So if you have a comment or anything, please go into the chat, or if you have a question, preferably go in the Q&A, which we're able to log those and make sure that we answer all questions. So anytime during the presentation, please feel free to send in your questions, and we'll make sure that every question is answered. Okay, with that, I'm going to go ahead and start. So here at the Chino Basin Water Conservation District, our mission is to sustain a regional water supply through public stewardship by engaging in the following categories. So we have three main categories: demonstrate, educate, and percolate. So for demonstrate, in our service area, we're part of the Santa Ana River Watershed. So here in the smaller, and you can see our logo, this is our service area. So we encompass Chino Hills, Rancho Cucamonga, Ontario, Fontana, and so we have quite a big service area where we focus on water conservation efforts. And so the name Chino Basin Water Conservation District is we're on top of the Chino Basin aquifer, which is underground water storage, which is one of the largest in the Santa Ana River watershed. So here's a cutout. So for an aquifer, so the Chino Basin the Chino Basin aquifer is an underground water storage system where we pull a lot of our water out. In fact, in our service area, over 50% of our water comes from this aquifer. So going back to our three main strategies. So for demonstrate, we have a beautiful 4-acre demonstration garden. We have plots and a walk-through demonstration garden that's unfortunately not open to the public as of right now. But our park is open, our wilderness park, where we have demonstrations of native landscapes, drought-tolerant landscapes. We have a turf area for people to enjoy, as well as climate-appropriate trees surrounding with information available on all the trees. And then educate. So this is part of our education program. So we do homeowner workshops as well as professional workshops. And we teach about transforming the urban landscapes. You know, the traditional lawn with sprinklers, with regular pop-ups. You know, we're more towards transformation, drip irrigation like this class, and efficient irrigation as well. And as far as web resources, we have a great website called the Inland Valley Garden Planner. And we have about 400 climate adapted plants that are searchable for our local area. We have plant list. We're constantly updating this with hopefully soon we're going to be updating the template program, where we're going to have landscape design templates will be added to that. And lastly, we percolate. So what does that mean? So as time, as we urbanize, as things have become urban, we have a lot of urban runoff. So as we pave our areas, we put in driveways, streets, buildings, we have a lot of runoff that would naturally go into the to the soil and penetrate down into, in our local area, our aquifer. But the urban environment leads to a lot of runoff. So I'm sure we've seen a lot of these. So as we drive in our urban areas, we see a lot of these channels. And these are storm runoff channels. So whenever the urban runoff happens, this is going to redirect that runoff and put it towards the ocean. But what we do here at Chino Basin Water Conservation District is we own 8 basins, and these basins actually trap that water. So we get runoff from the urban runoff, and then we also capture just rainwater. And these are the basins that we have. So we're actually able, just with 2 of our basins that are located right next to our facility, almost little over 47 million gallons if they reach their capacity. And a total capacity of our 8 basins is over almost 500 million gallons of water are actually able to be stored and put into the aquifer. So to give a little bit of context, a family of 4 is about 124,000 gallons of water used per year for a family of 4. So our main goal is to be deeply connected with our community. We have K through 12 field trips and workshops. We work with higher education families when we're able to have festivals. We work with homeowners, commercial professionals. So deeply connected with our community is our main goal. And again, since we're not able to meet face to face, I wanted to talk a little bit about myself. So why am I talking to you about irrigation? So I blame my parents. My parents own a landscape company, so I've only ever really worked in landscape my entire life. So I've been in the landscape industry for over 15 years doing installations. There's proof of me right there looking all scrubby after a hard day at work. Um, so irrigation installation was kind of where I started. And from there, I was a trainer. So I only taught irrigation courses with the Irrigator Technical Training School for about 3 years. I would travel around um, the southern states, but mostly I'm a nature nerd. Okay, so today's topic. So now that we can get into what we're here to talk about today. So what is drip irrigation? Components to design, talk about retrofits, layouts, maintenance, applications, and an irrigation schedule. So before I talk about anything, I always like to define terms. So what is drip irrigation? Well, according to dictionary.com, a system of crop irrigation involving controlled delivery of water directly to individual plants through a network of tubes and pipes. Okay. And then Wikipedia, drip irrigation is a type of micro irrigation system that has potential to save water and nutrients by allowing water to drip slowly to the roots of the plants, either from above the soil surface or buried below. Great. But how do I define drip? So it's a low pressure delivery of water. So as we go through this PowerPoint, we'll see filtration and pressure regulation is key to drip, and we'll cover why. It delivers water directly to the root zone. So we're not putting water into the air. So like a normal delivery system of a sprinkler, we're watering, we have misting, though not all the water droplets meet the soil in the intended area, or drip, that low volume amount dripping on the soil delivers water directly to the root zone. It could deliver water to a single point or multiple points along tubings, as in the example here. And so we have point source, low volume, and micro irrigation. We'll cover those. So here's an example. There's a lot of options and retrofit options, which can make your system considered a low volume or a drip system. So why are we even talking about drip specifically today? Why should we choose drip? Reduction in weeds is very possible. We're not necessarily watering areas that don't need to be watered, and we're watering deeper. The distribution uniformity is a very fancy word to demonstrate how evenly the water is being distributed over a zone. So here's an example of the drip emitters, and you can see eventually it's going to wick and cover that soil area. We lose less water due to evaporation, especially if we cover it with mulch. But we have a higher control of the amount of water that's actually beneficial to the soil and the plants themselves. And with that being said, there's also another side to drip. So in my experience, knowledge in drip irrigation design and maintenance is not widely known, and it must be installed correctly. So we'll see some examples, and hopefully after being on this webinar, and I applaud you for being here with us today, we'll have a better sense of how to properly install these systems. And then maintenance. Filtration needs to be flushed and cleaned periodically. And even though it is low flow, there still is quite a bit of water moving through these systems, as you can see indicated here. And when they're covered with mulch, it might be a little tougher for you to find these leaks, as opposed to a sprinkler that puts a lot more gallonage out. You'll be able to see puddles or water running off, where a drip irrigation system, failures may go unnoticed for quite some time if we're not vigilant. And so what is properly installed? I said this quite a few times. So here's a couple examples. So by the end of today, we should all know what properly installed means. And with that, I'm going to kick it over to Daniel, and Daniel's going to cover components.
Thank you, Brandon. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for being with us this morning and taking the time on a Saturday morning. So I guess I'll just share a little bit about me. My name is Daniel Moreno. I have been in the irrigation industry for about 5 years. Honestly, I really don't know how I found myself here, but 5 years later, this is where I'm at. And throughout those years, I've had the privilege to pick up a couple of certifications. One which is a qualified water efficient landscaper, which teaches how to do audits from beginning to end. Another one was another certification was through the California Landscape Contractors Association, which has to do with water management as well. And then I am currently in school to get my bachelor's in landscape architecture. Hooray. And that's a little bit about me. Next slide, Brandon. Awesome. So today we're going to be talking about drip components. We're going to go one by one. It looks like a lot, but it's pretty straightforward. So this is an irrigation valve. You usually see these valves either in front of the house, on the side of the house, or in the back of the house. This valve in particular is called an inline valve. You may have seen these before, mostly in commercial sites, not so much in residential areas in the state of California. In the East Coast areas, you probably see these a lot more. So we'll start from top to bottom. As you can see, there's a solenoid, and there's an on and off arrows right there. You can actually turn this valve off and on manually, clockwise or counterclockwise, so turn them off and on. Usually a timer is what sends power to this solenoid 24 volts to pull the pin up, which gives more air through the ports, which lets the water go through the valve. There's an inlet and there's an outlet. And the diaphragm is what you see in the center of the valve. So with the pin being pulled up, it gives enough pressure to the water in the inlet to push that diaphragm up. Also, what you see is a flow control. This is something a lot of people tend to do to either turn it off all the way or turn it on all the way. This is something that I wouldn't recommend for you to mess with all the time. You can put a lot of stress on the diaphragm and eventually tearing the diaphragm with time. This is something you usually adjust once the irrigation is completely on. And once you have it to a certain setting, I would recommend it just to leave it there. Usually with time, diaphragms do get stuck. You can pull it all the way up or you can pull it all the way down. Also, another part that you see here is a manual bleed or flush valve. So this is one way to turn on your valves real quick just to check if everything's running right. But a lot of them use it to flush out the valve from any debris that there may be sitting on top of the diaphragm. Awesome. So now more irrigation valves. So this is the irrigation valve that you would usually see or more commonly used on a residential area. Same thing, same parts, same internals, diaphragm, solenoid, flow control, and the manual bleed. The only difference is for residential areas, once the water is used, you don't want your water to run to your domestic water coming into your house. So this has a mechanism called an anti-siphon, that cap right in the back, as you can see. As soon as you turn off your water, water is going to want to go somewhere, whatever is in the pipe. So usually when it runs back, the water will come out through that cap, which helps out preventing any cross-contamination with the water. These valves usually do come in 3/4 or in 1 inch. Awesome. The next thing we're going to talk about are filters and pressure regulators. These are very important parts that you would want to have in any drip irrigation system. I personally recommend it to every drip irrigation system. Some people either are like, no, you don't really need it, or you do need it. No, you do need it for your drip irrigation to run very efficient. So to your left, you can see there's filters. These filters are meant to filter out small particles. Who knows what's in the water at times, but it really helps out. This filter really prevents any drip system to get clogged up, which I don't think anyone wants a clogged up drip system, especially if it's covered in mulch and you really wouldn't know whether or not water is coming out. Now to your right, you can see we got pressure regulators, 15 PSI, 25 PSI, 40 PSI, and so on. It's very important for the drip irrigation system to have a pressure regulator. One reason being is if you have over 80 PSI running through that drip system, you will blow out your emitters built in the inline drip, or you will blow out your button emitters as well. And sometimes a lot of these drip tubings have a maximum PSI pressure of 70 PSI that it can take. So again, filters and pressure regulators, very, very important in drip systems. And I always recommend it. I always say it, and I will continue to say it, very important. Awesome. So this is a product that Rainbird has. So does Toro, so does Hunter. This one is specific is by Rainbird. This is a pressure regulated filter. So it's a 2-in-1, and it helps out because you wouldn't have to waste another 6 inches where you install this to your valve. This regulates the pressure to 30 or 40 PSI. The 30 PSI one is a 3/4 inch filter, and the 40 PSI is a 1 inch filter. And it comes with a 200 mesh filter that is easy accessible and is recommended to use to clean out every 6 months. Very simple to clean out. One thing I really do recommend is wherever you have this filter, make sure to have enough space around it so you can have easy access to it. Sometimes they throw the dirt right back on there, and it makes it really tough to dig it out and try to clean out that filter. But this is a really great product. I recommend it to everyone. Just one note on those pressure regulator filters would be this. Don't install it backwards. There is an arrow that shows you exactly how to install it. There was one case, a customer had 2 different contractors check out the drip system and they couldn't figure it out. So they explained to me exactly what happened. And I was like, okay, I made the time to go to their house just to see that the filter was actually installed backwards. So obviously the drip system wasn't gonna work. And as you can tell, there's also an arrow on the valve itself indicating where the outlet is at. There's been cases where people install their valves backwards as well. But this is a great example on usually how it is installed when you bring it all together. Awesome. So after that, you usually have your drip tubing. You usually have 2 types of drip tubing. A 1/2 inch black solid tubing, as they call it, or polyethylene tubing, or a 1/2 inch inline drip emitter line tubing. Very popular, both of them. So we'll go with the black tubing first. This black tubing is usually used as a drip header most of the times. This drip tubing also comes in 3/4 inch and in 1 inch, but 1/2 inch should be more than enough water or for what you would need in your system, or which is the most popular size. It's rare to find a 1 inch and even at times a 3/4 inch. This tubing can be staked and it can be covered in mulch. The usual pressure rating for this tubing is usually 70 PSI. And again, like I said, if you have it installed correctly with a pressure regulated filter, you will be fine. This is also a drip tubing that you can use to tap into. So you can use 1/4 inch tubing running directly to your pots, plants, and etc. And you would only want to use compression fittings for that tubing specifically, which we will cover in the next couple of slides. Awesome. The brown tubing, inline tubing, emitter line, drip tubing. There's many names for this tubing, but it can be used for turf, shrubs, trees, and flowers. I personally like to use this specifically for shrubs and trees. Super efficient. They come in different flow rates. They come in 0.9, 0.6, 0.4, and 0.26 gallons per hour. They usually come in 12 to 18 inch spacing. And all these emitters turn on and off at the same time to just maximize the balance of the application itself. And it delivers equal amount of water through its constant pressure. And it can withstand heat and direct sun as well. And as you can see, what's inside of those holes, on the bottom right-hand corner, there's an image of what's inside there. Pretty cool. And you would only want to use barbed fittings for that tubing as well. Awesome. And by the way, we will have a section after the component section to answer any questions that you may have. So 1/4 inch and 1/8 inch spaghetti tubing, or also called as micro tubing. Next slide, please. Awesome. So this is a standard tubing that you usually connect drip emitters, sprayers, messers, and mini sprinkler tubings to these 1/4 inch tubing. So now 1/4 inch tubing is what you usually use, or it's exactly what you use when you use button emitters, and whatnot. The 1/8 inch tubing is only specifically for spray stakes, which we will cover later on. So it's just two different sizes. They look exactly the same, but it's just a little off. And again, this tubing is not meant for constant pressure to be used at all times. So it's recommended to have an automated timer and valve for your tubings to last longer. And again, I do recommend that if it's a 1/4 inch tubing, try to use a 1/4 inch fitting. There's been people that try to use 1/8 inch fittings that they look very close when you look at it, and it will not work. As soon as you turn on that drip system, it's gonna pop out those fittings. And the cool thing at the end of the day is that you choose exactly how you want to design it. There's many different ways, but we will definitely cover the most efficient way in regards to the experiences that between me and Brandon have had with drip tubing. And again, there's many different ways. The image in the middle, it's called a jet spray bubbler. You can adjust it. It can go from 0 to 10 gallons an hour. But again, if not pressure regulated, it will pop out and all you will have is just, you'll just be wasting water. And that image to your right, top right-hand corner, that is a 1 gallon an hour emitter being held by a stake. Sometimes people break that stake and then that emitter is watering completely something different that you didn't want to water. And then we have an octo bubbler. So you can spread out 4 different, 6, 8 different 1/4 inch tubing, and you can actually, when you open that, you can actually change out the emitters to whether you want it at 1 gallon, 2 gallon, 5 gallon, and so on. Awesome. So now to drip fittings. Again, these drip fittings or compression fittings, this is what I usually recommend for the black tubing. Next slide, please. So again, I usually recommend it for the black tubing. This is very popular among contractors only because due to low cost, it is cheaper than the brown tubing, but it can be very frustrating when installing. I guess one example of installing it on a cold day is definitely have some hot water on the side, dip your tubing, your end of the tubing in the hot water, and then as soon as you take it out, put that compression fitting right in and it'll work fine. And the cool thing about drip system is you do not need glue when it comes to the tubing, which is really awesome. And it saves a lot of time, a lot of headaches, and you don't make a mess. So that's for compression fittings. Those compression fittings, again, they do come in 1/2 inch, 3/4, and in 1 inch at times. So now we're at barbed fittings. Probably my favorite fitting to use for any drip system. To your right side, you can see a T, a 90, and a coupling. Those couplings are actually really awesome because you can actually use them to repair your tubing as well. And then you have your metal adapters in the bottom, 1/2 inch and 3/4. And an example of how the fitting looks like in the tubing on your left side. Next slide, please. Awesome. So retrofitting, many different ways of getting it done, getting the job done. Every system is different, and more because there's probably been 20 different hands already put on these systems. And sometimes you just gotta do it on your own and retrofit it. One of the biggest retrofit products out there that I'm gonna be talking about is the one, as you can see in the middle. That one in the middle is called an 1800 retrofit kit by Rainbird. I love this product. It's so amazing and it helps out so much when installing a drip system. When there's an existing sprinkler system going on where maybe your shrubs are at. Because this kit or the body itself on this is already pressure regulated at 30 PSI. Another thing is that there is already a filter inside of that body as well. And it just provides a convenient conversion drip tubing for this itself when you're using your barbed adapter as well. Awesome. So an example, if you have shrubs that's being watered by sprinklers, you may have 4, 5, 6. It might have a lot of sprinklers. But once you use that retrofit 1800 kit, you're gonna wanna cap off the rest of the sprinklers as well. This is a cap that you can use to cap off the 1800 body that's made by Rainbird. And the pressure is up to 70 PSI on these, and it's really simple. The only thing I do say is that there is an O-ring inside of that cap. Do not lose that O-ring. People tend to lose that O-ring, and then they install it, and then there's a lot of water waste. So again, this cap will have an O-ring in the inside. When you're twisting it on, be careful. And sometimes at the end of your drip line systems, you're gonna wanna flush out your system, whatever the filter couldn't catch or whatnot, or sometimes people use it to regulate the flow as well. So this is a shut off valve, turns it off and on, and you can flush out the system, your drip system. So you may have heard me talk about drip emitters. These things are pretty awesome when used correctly because they can come in many different gallons per hour. And if it's installed correctly, they can be super efficient. Next slide, please, Brendan. Awesome. And then now to micro sprays. It's another type of forms of drip. Many different ways that you can use them. To your left, you see many different colors because they shoot out different gallonage. They shoot out different spray patterns as well. And that one the image to your top left-hand corner, that stake that you see, that one sprays like a fountain, which is pretty cool. But a lot of the times, pressure will blow that cap out, and now you have a full-on fountain going on in the backyard. Again, ideal for plants, trees, containers, and flower beds. And again, they come in full, half, and quarter circle. And a lot of these can be adjusted from 0 to 10 gallons an hour, or maybe even more. And earlier I was talking about a 1/8 inch spray stakes when I was talking about the drip tubing itself. So these are your spray stakes. They do come in different colors because they shoot in different patterns and they shoot out different gallonage as well. This is something I only recommend when you have pots, or maybe you have a really small backyard, and wherever your pots are at, you can just run the 1/2 inch tubing, tap off from it with your 1/8 inch tubing, and then just install your spray stakes on every single pot that you may have. One thing is, just be careful when you install it. Some people tend to push it all the way through, that that water will not come out of it. These spray stakes are also known as spot spitters in the industry as well, and it delivers very accurate watering or direct watering to the root zone without any waste. And again, there's a couple examples here. Black high flow, 160-degree patterns for a 15 to 20 gallon pot, green for a 5 to 15 gallon container, and so on. We can go to the next slide, Brandon. All righty. Thank you everyone for these couple of last minutes. Hopefully I was very clear. If you do have any questions, feel free to ask, but I will give it back to Brandon. Brandon?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Daniel. Okay, so now we're familiar with the components. I wanted to take a quick break to check for any questions. So we do have, actually, we have 2 questions now. So the first question is from Lynn. What is the typical lifespan of a 1/2 or 1/4 inch drip tubing? Great question. The answer I would say is it depends. Just like most of my answers, unfortunately. It depends on if it's exposed to the sun, if it's in a high traffic area. This tubing is pretty fragile in the sense of can become pretty brittle. So I would say I've seen it last anywhere between 2 to 5 years, as well as a much longer period than that. So it kind of depends on sun exposure. Daniel mentioned the drip stakes. If it's staked properly, typically when we do evaluations for homeowners, as well as my experience doing landscape maintenance, these typically tend to have a much shorter lifespan than the larger tubing or sprinklers in general. So hopefully that gave you a little bit. I have another question. Okay, so I have one from Sabrina. So she has she said, what suggestions do you have for accommodating having both drought resistant, they're newer, still taking a bit more water once they're established, and food crops on the same system? She's having a hard time balancing the different emitters. Yes, that's actually, we'll cover that coming up when we get into design and things like that, but that's kind of an uphill battle where food crops need a lot more water than drought resistant plant material. And depending on the drought resistant plant material, they typically do not like a lot of water and will struggle. So maybe separating those into two different zones, and we'll talk about retrofitting in easier ways to balance that. Um, that's a little tough. Um, okay, I'm gonna do one more, and then any more questions? I have several places where we're gonna stop. I'll do one more. It says, can you use barb connectors with black solid tubing? It's easier to install than compression. Um, so yeah, so depending on the size of the tubing, so if it's a 17 millimeter tubing, you get the proper barbed fittings for that. Um, the compression fittings are made with the same manufacturer as the one that Daniel talked about. So the compression fittings were a little bit easier, but barb fittings are an option. Just always look to match the manufacturer. So if you have a specific manufacturer for your solid tubing, your black tubing, make sure that you have the connectors that are the same brand, because they might look the same, but the inside diameter and the outside diameter might be different. And when we have these low pressure systems, we're not gluing things. So we need to make sure that the fitting is solid and makes a good connection, but it is possible. And I will get to the other questions shortly. But thank you. Keep the questions coming. I love the questions. Okay, so now that Daniel covered all the parts, so now we don't have to slow down to talk about the parts. So where do we start? So we need to start with a site survey. So this could be very simple, or we can make it or be very technical. But we want to start. Hand draw Hand drawing is fine. We need to determine the square footage of the area that we're going to either convert to drip irrigation or we're going to put drip irrigation in. All right, so here's just an example of a hand drawn. You can use graph paper. I'm a big fan of just drawing things out, but also using computer programs. And the next thing we need to identify, which is very, very important when we're installing a drip system and designing a drip system, is to know the soil type. So we can either determine it on the site, or we can send it to a laboratory. So here's just an example of a soil jar test where we put about a third of the soil in the jar. So we just pick the soil. We pick the soil, we put it in the jar, and then we fill it up with water with a splash of detergent, shake it up, and then over time we'll get a separation of the clay, silt, and sand. I don't want to spend a ton of time on this, but based on these percentages, you can use the soil triangle, and you can figure out what type of soil. So we just want to do the macro level of the soil, so either sand, loam, clay, or coarse sand. Probably most of us don't have coarse sand, so we're looking at either a clay, a loam, which is a mixture of sand and clay, ideal for horticulture and agriculture. And then we also need to determine the plants, that material that we're going to be irrigating. So either it's a high water needs, medium water needs, low, or very low. Okay, so now that we did our site evaluation, we need to here's the data from the area that I'm going to show up where we installed, and picture by picture of an installation. So this is here at our DIY area at our demonstration garden. They had sprinklers here. We took the sprinklers out and we put drip irrigation in this area. So for reference here, we have 415 square feet. So this is a clip from Google Earth Pro, free resource. If you have not used it, I highly recommend it. I use this all the time. So I'm able to look, create this nice area because, of course, you know, as landscape designers, we don't like everything to be square or rectangle. So we want to have some nice curvature, some appeal. So I'm able to get the square footage on these odd shaped areas. And we determined to have sandy loam. So we're kind of close to the foothills here in the Inland Empire, very sandy, rocky soil. And then we're going to be using low water shrubs, right? So this is our area where we're doing native hedge. So native plants, and we're going to show different examples of how to hedge them for your home landscape. So we have options. So we're going to cover two options. One I prefer more than the other. So we'll show the design on the one I prefer, but there is point source irrigation. Daniel covered some of the parts, but this puts water only to the plants, right? Requires less material overall. The benefit. But these parts tend to break down over time. That was kind of the first question about how long does this spaghetti tubing or 1/4 1/8 inch tubing last. They tend to break down over time. And then as these plants grow, they're going to need more emitters, more adjustment. So this could become difficult. That was kind of the question also of, will I have some drought tolerant as well as some food crop on the same zone, and balancing that is a little tough. I agree that it is very tough to balance that. So these next couple slides are the manufacturer's recommendations. So small shrubs up to 36 inches in diameter need 2 or 3. Kind of vague there. 1 gallon per hour. So we're more in a hot and arid, so that would be 60 minutes per week. Large shrubs, 2 to 3 as well, but 2 gallons per hour. And then we have the micro bubblers, which we see a lot of, but they're adjustable. So it could be from 0 to 13 gallons per hour, which is a variable, which is a wild card. So having that even water is a little bit tougher. For small trees, so we think about a 10 foot canopy. 2 emitters are needed, as well as adjustment bubblers. For large trees, they say a 5 gallon per hour, and you need 2, but that's not going to evenly distribute water on a large canopy. So what would that even look like? So this would be a large tree. So we have the drip line. So when you want to water a tree, we want to keep the water away from the base, and we want to water underneath the canopy and extending past the canopy to promote healthy roots. And if we did this point source for a tree, we would have, as you can see, a lot of emitters. And as this tree would grow, the drip line would extend, and we would need to be putting a lot more emitters over time, which never, in practicality, it does not get done. I've been doing this for over 15 years professionally, and I never go back and add more emitters. What's the alternative? The alternative is a drip grid. So this is an example of a basic layout. So we have, like Daniel said, here's our irrigation valve, our pressure regulator, our filter. We have a PVC header, allows for the flow, and then we have a drip tubing that runs throughout the zone. And there's emitters spaced out either 12 inches, 18 inches apart. And you can see here, this is where the watering would take place, and they will overlap. Great. So now that we know, let's look into this inline emitter system. The question is always what emitters do I need, or like what type of tubing, at what flow rate. So we start with the charts. So there's very, very helpful charts from the manufacturers. This is provided by Netafim, which is one of the manufacturers. And we're looking at the tech line here, and we're looking at shrubs and ground cover. So we're focusing on the area that we renovated. Sandy soil is 0.6 gallons per hour, 12-inch emitter spacing, and we did 18 inches apart. So here's a zoomed in. So this is what we came up with. So we wanted emitter flows at 0.6 gallons per hour, dripper intervals of 12 inches, row spacing of 18 inches. So every row of the drip tubing, we do it 18 inches apart. And then now we know our application rate is 0.65 inches per hour, which we'll cover when we get into how long to run the irrigation controller. So choosing your emitters and your spacing, again, this is depending on your soil type. That's why one of the 3 things that we need to figure out before we start putting our drip irrigation in is to know if we have clay, loam, or sand soil. Right, so this is just some clay is forms of hard clumps. When damp, it is flexible and can be molded into shapes. Loam is moderate sand or dirt and very little clay. Sand is coarse particles. When we put it in our hand, we can feel the graininess is one indicator for sandy soil. Great, so what does all this mean? Well, going back to our area, so this is another Google Earth Pro, and I was able to put these lines here and figure out how many linear feet of tubing I need. So we have allotted tubing length of 400 square feet. So when we make our sketch, we want to make sure the square footage is accurate so we can figure out how many feet we can put on one irrigation zone. And then what about trees? So installing around trees, it's a little different than putting a grid in, but the principles are still the same. So the spacing in between, away from the trunk, as well as in the between the loops is going to be the same spacing. So we did ours at 18 inches. So this installation would be 18 inches apart. And as this tree grows, we'll need to cut into this tubing and then add another loop 18 inches. So you can see as a juvenile tree, we would need less material, but as the tree matures, we need to move the irrigation to be to reflect the drip line and the maturity of the tree. This is a spec by Netafim. So they have a manual flush valve on each one of these loops in case any debris gets into the system, open up and flush those out. And to maximize the amount of emitters and tubing that you can put, you would put a PVC, what we call a header. So from the irrigation valve here, we would have just a normal 3/4 or 1 inch, depending on the size of the valve, a PVC pipe. And then from there, we would connect to just the tubing. So the only place getting watered is these what we call rings around the drip or around the tree. And then briefly, I just want to cover slopes. So if we do have a sloped area, drip irrigation is also an option for sloped areas. With the 18-inch spacing, again, depending on your soil type, but we're going with 18-inch for the upper 2/3 of the slope of that zone. We would keep it at 18 inches, and then the bottom we would expand it to up to 25% larger gaps in that, due to just when you water a slope, the upper part of the slope tends to hold more water, and then water runs off and then captures just due to gravity to that bottom third. So spacing out the emitters will allow for, we won't be overwatering on that bottom slope. Great option for slope. if that's a scenario because of the slow application of the water. Pop-ups on a slope tend to have a lot of runoff. So this is going to help alleviate that issue. So for summary, we have emitter spacings of 12 inches apart. So on the tubing itself, we have multiple emitters, and we have 12 inches apart for our design. And then for our row spacings, so in between these rows, these need to be tidied up a little bit. This was an installation I did in West Hollywood. We have these will be stapled in, and these will be 18 inches apart. So when we talk about emitter spacing, we're talking about the tubing itself with the emitters where the water comes out of. And then row spacing is how much distance between the rows are we designing for. And so Daniel talked a little bit about retrofitting. So retrofitting is a great option to kind of change your standard spray zone to a drip irrigation zone. So this in particular is the Rainbird 1800 retrofit kit. So it does pressure regulate. So inside the replacement head, so you just dig out your sprinkler head, this screws into the piping. There's a pressure regulator and a filter in the body of the sprinkler. So that allows for your irrigation system to drop the pressure down to 30 PSI, as well as the filtration, so you don't have to cut into the valves, which we'll cover in our next section of installation. But it's a great option. You do have to cap the other sprinkler heads off, and I have pictures of that. But this will allow you to convert a standard spray zone to a drip irrigation zone. And for the basic design, for one zone that you're going to cover, you can put one retrofit kit into it. So for instance, if you have 8 sprinklers on a standard homeowner irrigation valve, and you want to replace that to drip, let's say it's in your planter bed, some areas where you don't want to have overhead spray, one retrofit kit and capping all the other sprinklers will allow you to have you can run your tubing, and you will do okay with just one. So here's an area that in our garden that we retrofitted. So this was, you can see we had standard sprinklers, overhead spray, and it ran about here. You can see that on the top 10% of the picture. This was all spray, and it went across this swell, and we retrofitted this area to drip. So we capped sprinklers throughout. In the center, we put the retrofit kit, and now this is drip tubing run throughout this area in a grid style, which is covered with mulch now. And so this is some pictures. So you would need a pair of channel locks or any kind of pliers that you prefer. And basically you take, this is called the guts. So this is the inside part of the pop-up. This is the spring, the stem, the nozzle, the cap. You remove all of this and then insert the cap on top of the body. So you don't have to dig your sprinklers out. Simply unscrew the cap, pull the entire stem out, the complete piece of the mechanism that pops up, and then just put a cap on, and that's a solid transformation. Right, and if you want to, you can dig this down and readjust it if you want to, but this is, we cleared away some of the mulch so we can show an example. So this is a cap on that zone because we converted this to drip. So with that, I would like to take a 5-minute break, and if there's a couple questions. So if there's any more questions, please feel free to chime in the Q&A, and we will get to those after our short break. All right, we're back. Okay, we have quite a few questions, so let's get a couple of these in. And if I do not get to your questions during the break, I'll definitely stay after the presentation is over. I will definitely get to every one of your questions. So I have a question here from Grandma and Grandpa. What number of and sizes would we need for medium-sized plants and for 10-year-old trees? Okay, so if we're looking at emitters, let me see if I can go back to that. It depends on how close these plants are to each other. Again, I don't necessarily recommend putting these emitters, but if that is your only option, 2 gallon per hour emitters, if they're medium sized, I would put at least 3 of them evenly distributed, not too close to the trunk, because no plants like that. However, it's not the most um, efficient way to deliver water to the entire root zone of the plant. So in that case, I would suggest doing circles like the trees for the inline. Let me go to that. This also works very well with shrubs. If you just want to water underneath the canopy of the shrubs, but this also depends on how close your shrubs are together and how close your trees are together. I hope that answered your question. If not, I will have my email and my contact information at the end of the presentation, and please feel free to send me pictures and I can probably give you a better answer on that. Okay, another question. In the example of the land has a slope, how do I install um, for the slope? So in the example, if the land has a slope, how do I install it? So we would install it the same. Let me go to that slide. We would just do linear. So we would go depending from the bottom of the slope, straight lines, linear, all the way up to the top, where our spacing would be close together on 2/3 of it. And then at the bottom of the slope, we would increase our spacing. That's the best practices when we're installing on slopes, just to give that bottom a little bit more distance so that we don't have a lot of overwatering and pooling like we typically do on all installations of on slopes, whether it be pop-ups, drip, any kind of water delivery system. Hope that answered your question. Okay. Next question, how or where do I find an irrigation designer that actually knows the details versus someone who installs drip as well as putting, if they were putting Legos together? Great question. That's a little tough one, especially for us being a government agency. We, for one, we don't install, or we can give recommendations in our service area, but Lynn, if you want to send me an email, I can give you a list of, at least in our area, local landscape supply houses that supply, parts, and they have a preferred list. We do not have a preferred list of contractors. But hopefully today will kind of give you a little bit of an idea of how to get started if you want to do it yourself. Next one. So a grid pattern tubing is preferable with shrubs and circular spiral tubing for trees. Yes, absolutely. You can also, and we have done it as well as doing the grid style tubing around trees. We just have to make modifications so the tubing is not set against the trunk of the tree, because again, trees do not like to get watered right by their trunk. It promotes bacteria, fungal issues. So the grid pattern, if you want to cover your entire area and you're watering the same frequency, so how often and how long you're watering suits a tree, as well as the surrounding plant material, it is fine. But if you're able to, not everybody's able to, but if you're able to separate your trees on a separate irrigation valve as opposed to any other plant material, the tree is going to be much happier. In that case, you would run the circle patterns on that. But you can also do the grid pattern if you have a tree in your zone. Okay, so I'm going to do a couple more. Let's see here. Gabriel, do you provide consultations? Do you install irrigation systems in homes in Los Angeles? We do not. Sorry about that, Gabriel. We are blocks away. Our facility is less than a mile away from LA County. Claremont is the most eastern city in LA County, and we're right up next to it, so we get a lot of that question. We do consultations for irrigation efficiency for residents in our service area, but at this time, for obvious reasons, we are not doing one-on-one consultations with homeowners, but that would be in our service area, which is the Western San Bernardino County Inland Empire area. So sorry, Gabriel, but thank you for being on this call. Hopefully we'll give you some ideas to help you. And I'm going to do one more for this section, but please, I'll answer every question. Please feel free to ask them. I love getting these questions. So I have one from Gladys. I have a place at my work and it has drip irrigation system. The plant material is lavender and rosemary. I guess that they were small when they were installed. Now the plants are bigger and the system is not really working. Does it need to be replaced? Do I need to replace the whole system? Yes. Okay, so I guess the answer is maybe. I'm not sure. I'm sure that doesn't really help you. Okay, so typically it depends on what type of drip system it is. If it is the point source where there are emitters with the smaller tubing, they can also, as the plant grows, especially something as dense as like a lavender or a rosemary, they want to expand and they will expand. So that's one of the issues I personally have with using the button emitters or the point source for a large area, especially with shrubs that are dense, because they kind of outgrow the irrigation system. You can turn your system up to water more. That's not a very viable or an efficient way of combating that issue. I would do, and I've done countless times, is kind of poke around, dig up the system and see. It could just, honestly, it could just be an issue that you need to maintenance your filter. That's something that we need to do twice a year. So if it's a drip irrigation system, it should have and must have a filtration system, because our emitters and the area, the orifices that the water is coming out of are so small that that filter protects against contaminants going into that. So with I would start there. I would open up and flush out your system. Hopefully there's a flush, whether it be a manual on and off flush or an air flush. Flush out the drip system, check the filter, and go from there. But definitely having to kind of dig up, unfortunately, dig up kind of the system and see kind of what kind of system that is going on there. And that's why if you're going to install a system and you're thinking about it, the grid system is, in my opinion, the way to go. But good luck on that. I think we should have some solutions as we go through, but definitely check your filter, flush the filter, flush out the system if you're able to, and then kind of poke around, dig around, and see if there's if it's point source or if it's grid. So hopefully that, and again, my email will be at the end. So if you do have pictures or questions, please feel free to email me. And I'm going to go ahead and continue. There's a couple questions left, but I will get those in a next break. Okay, so now let's get into installation. So where do we start with? So we start with the irrigation valves. So this is a manifold that I installed years ago. We had two of them that were drip systems. You can see we have the pressure regulator, the filter. So this was at a home. So this is the anti-siphon valves. And so critical for a drip system to have filtration and pressure regulation. So I kind of hit on that on the question, but filtration is paramount because of the small size of the orifices that this drip system is that the water's passing through can be easily clogged. So this filter is going to capture any particles that go. So water from the valve, first thing that it is introduced to is this filter, ideally. It does need to get serviced like twice a year. And I have pictures on what that service looks like. So just an example of a home renovation. They tapped into, this is the main line where there's the hose bib, tapped into this, and they have 4 valves now drip, as well as here's another anti-siphon valve with this pressure regulator and filter. So now the popularity in landscaping, horticulture has been into drip irrigation for many years. The popularity is really coming into home landscapes, commercial landscapes, so more of a horticulture as opposed to agriculture. The products now are really coming along. So this is a regular pressure regulator and a filter. You can get these at any big box store or specialty irrigation store. So you don't have, you just plug this in and it automatically reduces your pressure depending on it's 30 psi or 40 psi. And it will also have the filtration system. So a lot easier when we're trying to renovate. All right, so here's what Daniel talked about the arrow. So we don't want to install this backwards. So it tells us the flow goes from left to right. These, and then the size of the threading. So this one is regulated to 30 psi, and the reason why we want to knock the pressure down to that 30 psi again is our drip system does not have glue. They are either compression or insert fittings, barbed fittings, and because of that low pressure, the emitters are allowed to give water out very slowly, and that's the benefit of the drip irrigation. Again, it's a 200 mesh filter is the standard. So very small particles will be captured in this filtration system. So the cap screws off. Here's the filter coming out. So you can see very tiny particles. And this you would just take out when the valve's not working. We don't have any pressure going into the system. Unscrew the cap, take this out, just run some water over it. That'll help clean out this filter. Right, so here's just a different manufacturer, but same thing. This one is just only a filter, so this has a bigger filter case. Depending on the area that you're installing this, you might need a thicker filter or a larger filter, but typically we don't need this large of a filter. And so here is another of a different brand, but the same filter. You can see very small holes in this filter to capture all those particles. So this is just an example of what that looked like. So they opted for the filtration system first, and then the pressure regulation second, which is also an option. Or there are units where they are together in one piece. A lot of options. And then there's also options where, we don't necessarily need an irrigation valve and an irrigation controller. We can have adapters. So there are drip filtration and pressure regulation systems that connect to a hose bib. So if we have a hose bib and we're doing a raised bed planters, and we're doing veggies or something like that, and we don't want to have it on an irrigation timer because we're out there a lot and have a lot of hands-on with the area, this is a viable option. Still have the filtration and the pressure regulation system, but taps off into a drip irrigation system. And to take that one step further, there are hose bib timers. So this is essentially an irrigation controller where um, we're able to program it so we can turn leave those on. There's irrigation valve, sort of. There's a diaphragm and allows water to be held back and pass through depending on how we program it, just like an irrigation controller. They tend to wear out fairly quickly. But if you don't have power, if you just want to have one zone, this is also an option to convert to drip irrigation from a hose bib. Okay, so now that we covered the irrigation valves and the beginning of it, now I want to talk about putting headers in. So we do have the option of going just from the irrigation valve, the pressure regulator, the filter, to a straight to the tubing. But in a lot of cases, we need to travel a large amount of area. So we install what's called headers. So PVC headers or any kind of solid tubing, things like that. So this is, in our example, we used, which I'll cover, we used Blue Lock, which is a sort of a poly pipe, not a PVC, but we've also installed PVC. So this allows for more flow, a larger amount of water to be available for the system that we're installing, which means we can have a larger amount of tubing. And when we're installing these headers, we want to do 2 to 4 inches away from the hardscape. And we connect the tubing where the water is going to be coming from, the emitters, the emitter tubing, in between the headers. So now I'm going to start the picture by picture of our renovation. So this is the tubing. So this would be a header. This is 3/4 inch, purple because it indicates that we have recycled water. So all of our site, except for the fruit trees, are watered with recycled water. And we also don't have any issues with drip irrigation on the areas that we do have drip irrigation. It also works very well with recycled water. Right, so this is the solid tubing. This is connected directly to the irrigation valve. So we want to make sure that it's 2 to 4 inches away from hardscape. And then once we start putting our T's, which is our irrigation fittings, we're going to be tapping off and doing our drip zones, our drip laterals. We want to always make sure that everything is spaced properly. A mini sledge is very helpful. We need to use stakes to hold down the piping as well as hold down the drip tubing, so we can ensure that the spacing is proper. And now that we have our headers spaced out, we're going to start putting our T's. So again, this is a no glue option that we prefer when we're doing 1 inch to 3/4 inch residential areas. This is called Blue Lock. It's not really that available if you go to big box stores, or even if you go to specialty irrigation stores. It's mostly something that you need to order, but this is typically, or actually it's more of like a compression fitting than a glue, and we don't glue. So if you have veggies and you don't want to use PVC pipe with glue and primer, this is an option. So that's why it looks a little different. The idea is the same. So we heard from this area 18 inches in. Here's our fitting that's going to convert it to our drip tubing, and we go along our header. This is putting a staple down so that we can ensure that that 18 inches is going to stay. One thing that I don't have a slide for, but I wanted to chime in about, is emitters on this tubing are 12 inches apart, yet when we need them to be overlapping when we install. So when we install the first line of drip tubing, the next drip tubing, I need the emitter to be halfway. So 6 inches from this emitter, I need the next row, I need it to be offset 6 inches. And so what that's going to do is that's going to ensure that when the water pulls out, the other one is going to pull out, and it's going to have a lot of uniformity. So we're going to be able to have the water being distributed very evenly over the entire zone. So here's a nice example of, this is our header. So every single T, you can see these blue fittings. This is where our laterals are going to be connected to. And so another question that we get quite often is, well, what type of emitter or what type of drip tubing? So there's a lot out on the market. This is Dig, one of the major companies. They do have their own fittings. So again, if you going to buy whatever brand that you are going to buy, make sure that the fittings that you buy are from the same manufacturer and are for the same product. Very, very important, because although they look identical, the outside diameter or the inside diameter of the tubing can be off by a little bit. Another brand that that we use here is the Rainbird drip tubing, and the reason why we like to use it is the tool, honestly, where the fitting can be inserted into the tool, and you can use the palm of your hand here, and you put your fingers around there, and you're able to push it in. Because if anybody has done drip irrigation, putting those insert fittings in, even the compression fittings, can be at times. I feel like I've nicked my hands and hurt myself more installing drip tubing than in any other aspect of landscaping that I've done. And mentioned a remedy that helps, having a warm cup of water, but also, I mean, during this time of the year, if you just leave the tubing out in the sun for a little bit and it kind of warms up, it becomes more malleable. You're able to insert the fittings a little bit easier. But definitely the Rainbird tool is something that definitely helps to do that. And then briefly, I wanted to cover what the emitter looks like on the inside. So all we see is just a port, but these are very highly engineered emitters, where the water becomes diffused. It's pressure regulated as well. There's a check valve in most of these, so it doesn't allow all the water to drain out of the tube, so we don't lose water there. So you can see all these paths can be clogged. They tend to not be clogged if you're on top of your filtration and cleaning out your filter, but it's more than just like a little hole in the tubing. This is the tip that's underneath it. Right, and so there are different choices again. So this one, it tells you the flow rate. So this is very important when you're looking at the design, or you design it, and then when you go to buy the parts, this says 0.9 gallons per hour. The spacing between the emitters, again, emitter spacing is the spacing between the emitters is 12 inches. And this entire length of the coil is 500 feet. So that's 500 feet of material. So knowing how much you need will tell you, this even tells you maximum length with inlet pressure. A lot of information will come off of the label. And here's just a close-up of the staple. So this is the staple that holds down the inline drip tubing, the header, if you need to hold your header down, as well as even if you're using any type of drip irrigation, these staples will ensure that the row spacing is standard, or will not move over time. Especially when you look at comes in a circle, in a round circling of the tubing. We need it to be in a linear application. So that's where these staples come. This is another tool. This is a Rainbird tool, which you can get, but you can use scissors or a knife. You just need to cut the drip tubing flush. And then installing into the compression fitting, it's as easy as just pushing it in. Like I said, heating up the tubing helps to make it more malleable. Anything that can kind of help. It's intended to be put on the fitting and not taken off. So so it's a little tight. So this was the area that we were looking at. We have our emitter spacing, or we have our spacing of 18 inches. I mean, there's things along the way that are going to kind of adjust, but we bring it back to 18 inches. This is our header. Our header has our T's that are spaced out at that same spacing. We have a gap between the hardscape and the header, so we're not watering in this area. And here's another example. So this needs to be trued up a little bit. That's why we need staple. Otherwise, it could be a little off with the spacing. And you can see this is being installed. It's kind of like a curly Q type of roll. But once everything's stapled, our spacing is pretty much set. So we're going to evenly distribute water throughout this entire zone. This was before we started planting all of our native plants for native. Once we install it, you always want to turn it on. We want to make sure that water, again, is being evenly distributed. You can see here, we can see the wetted area on the top, but the water connects underneath the soil surface. And then here's our back header. So this is our exhaust header. So as the water fills up, then comes into this header. So it equalizes our system. And it's not always perfectly, the header doesn't have to be perfect. We tapped into this line here and made an offshoot around this rock area. And then we always want to install flush valves and air relief valves. So what does that mean? So what is a flush valve? So a flush valve, here we installed the manual flush valve. They have automatic flush valves as well. But basically it's just a valve. So on and off, we put it at the end of our our zone, or we put it in the middle. So it gives us the ability to open up and flush the system out. Ideally, you would put it in like a 10-inch round box that you dig down, gravel at the bottom, especially if you have an automatic relief valve, because it's going to be every time the valve comes on and the system is running, it's going to flush in the beginning to kind of keep the debris out of the zone or out of the tubing. Right, and so they have them in barb fittings, just a simple on and off. So this would be open, you turn and it would close off. So here's Daniel opening our exhaust header flush valve. Definitely when you first install a system, you want to make sure to flush it, just like any irrigation system. So opening this up when the zone is on, flushing, and it'll keep any debris from clogging your emitters. How to design around trees. Here's just a very simple, basically just doing circling around the tree. This is our persimmon tree in our courtyard. Into the header, which is a solid tubing here, and just basically keeping that 18-inch spacing, not getting too close to the trunk. That's a very thick way to put drip around the trees. Stapled, of course. Here's just a simple male adapter flush cap. So you would pair of pliers and maybe some channel locks and unscrew this cap here, allowing the system to be flushed out. Another option. So for those of you that were that attended Scott's workshop about efficient irrigation for fruit trees and vegetables, he talked in more depth about drip tape. I'm not going to cover it entirely here. So essentially, it's the same principle as a drip inline drip tubing. This is used more for agriculture, and the spacing is a lot closer to typically for vegetable beds. We want to do 6 inches apart. And then also, if you go to our cbwcd.org/YouTube, you can watch Scott's presentation from last week. Great presentation. So I stole a couple slides from him. So this would be the same thing. We have the header coming up into our raised bed garden, and then the drip tape is used in lieu of the inline drip tubing because of the emitters are closer on this drip tape. Perfect for very loamy raised bed garden. Another option, so this is our raised beds here in our DIY area in our demonstration garden. And this is 1/4-inch tubing, but it is also inline. It has inline emitters every 6 inches. So we used solid tubing as a header, and we installed these as the laterals, and this 1/4-inch tubing has emitters every 6 inches, which is, again, ideal for raised bed gardening. A little beat up, but this was a couple days ago. I took a picture. This is in our DIY. Our tomatoes are going crazy right now. So with that, I am going to take some more questions. Let's see. Seems like we have quite a few questions. Let me... Okay, so let's go to the questions. So from Vicky says, I have one big evergreen tree I never have watered. I mostly have raised bed gardens and flower beds, which I want to cut flowers in and a few shrubs. How can I water with 2 drip lines straight against 200-foot fence to a raised garden and potted plants back there? Okay. Wow, that's a big question. Okay. Um, why don't we do this? If that's okay with you, Vicky, if you could either wait till the end, or better yet, if at the end you can send me an email. Um, I think I could help you a lot, like a lot easier and more efficiently if you could send me some pictures. I think I definitely give you a definitely give you a better answer. Hopefully you're okay with that. Um, Next one, can you use vinegar when cleaning? You can absolutely use vinegar if you want to clean out your system. I have heard, but I have not done. People will put a little bit of vinegar into the system of a drip system, and then turn it on after they put the filter back in, and that kind of helps, especially with like hard water issues. So I think that is a viable option. Next one, my system kit included a pressure regulator already. Could having a filter also contain a regulator? Could could a filter also contain a regulator cause an issue? Um, so if your kit has a pressure regulator for your drip system, that's great. We established that. Um, there are units that do have regulators and pressure, or filters and regulators in all in one, but there would have to be some sort of a jar top, someplace where you can unscrew it. If it's just a pressure regulator in line, and there's no possible way that there's a filter on that, that might be an issue. So they might be separate. Um, but if the regulator also, I mean, also regulators go can go bad, I suppose. They can start malfunctioning and preventing flow from going through. So um, yeah, I'm not really sure the best answer for that one. Let's see. I'll take a couple more. We have plenty of time. Okay, so the next one says, I do not have an installed irrigation system at my house, but rather a front yard, side yard, backyard hose bibs. I plan to install native plant garden, but we'll also have an area for vegetables and door fruit tree garden. I think it would be wise to add another line for the basic hose bib irrigation system just for the garden area, so that I can use my main backyard bib for the native plants on a separate line. What are my options for getting such a line installed? Okay, great question. First of all, applaud you for undertaking that big of a renovation and looking towards native plants and vegetables. Definitely what I prefer to install. Um, so there are a lot of options. I would say you can, well, every hose bib is connected to a main line, which is connected to either your home or your directly to your water meter. So if you dig around where there's already a hose bib, you will find a line where you can tap into if you want to add either irrigation valves, or just another hose bib. Separating your native plants in a grouping, a water, either through on one, what we call a hydrozone, so a grouping of both irrigation and plant material. That's ideal, because your fruit trees and especially your vegetables need a lot more water, more periodically, uh, than or sorry, more frequently than where your natives, once they're established, do not like that consistent watering. So there are a lot of options. But typically when we install an irrigation valve on a residence, it's usually connected around a hose bib because there is water available there. There's a main line. Installing valves is an option for you, or installing multiple hose bibs, because again, if there's a hose bib there, then we know that water is available. So and again, for these more specific questions, I feel like I would be more helpful through email and with pictures. So if that didn't quite answer your question, please feel free to email me. So I have a question. Would you repost the video of raised beds with the growing plant? Yeah, this presentation is being recorded on YouTube Live. So as well as the PDF will be available, I would say by Monday on our website, and I'll cover the website again. So if there's any pictures or anything that you might have missed or want to see again, please feel free to view those once they're available. Okay, I'm gonna do one more and then we have another break where I'll answer some more questions. Okay, another one. Would you recommend a tree hedge? A hedge is around the whole property, 6 feet tall. The area around had grass, but the grass has been replaced with drought tolerant plants and the irrigation system is off for now. Okay, so would you recommend, what do you recommend for a tree hedge? Okay, so a tree hedge, I think if I'm understanding right, a tree that's going to be bushy, and yet pruned to be a hedge. If you are not irrigating and you want to plant something new, that is, unless you go out there hand watering, there are options. And I could, Gladys, if you want to email me, I could give some better recommendations to match, because we don't want to put something that is going to require more water than your drought tolerant area. So you're going to have to water for your hedge, and then that's going to kind of overwater your drought tolerant plants, which kind of takes away the idea of having a drought tolerant planting. So if you could send me an email and maybe I could help you out with that. I know, I'm sorry. This is kind of this is one of the drawbacks. I'm able to talk to a lot more of you because you don't have to travel to our site, and yet I can't really see the pictures and things like that. Okay, I will get to questions. And again, keep the questions coming. We'll make sure we cover them all. Okay, so for maintenance, again, I spoke about this a few times, but definitely we need to flush our filters, right? Like this kid, right? Flush these filters. We want to do that at least twice a year is the manufactured specification. You can possibly get away with once a year, but the more that you open that up, you have more hands on your system. You're more apt to have a more efficient system when you're paying attention to it. A lot of commercial sites, they don't ever flush the filter, or they don't ever clean the filter, and things become clogged. With drip irrigation, when things get clogged, it's a little bit harder to figure out the issue. You have to do a lot more digging and probing to find out exactly where the issue is. But definitely always want to make sure these filters, because they can get, if there's, for some reason, if it gets clogged a lot to where water's not really passing through it, it'll affect your entire zone. And so again, here's the picture of that same filter, just the screw cap, unscrew it, pull the filter out. Once the filter is out, you can flush it. Somebody asked the question if you can use vinegar. I would use whatever's not a very harsh cleaner if it needs to. I wouldn't say that it necessarily needs to. Just a quick run under the hose bib or anything like that. If it seems to have a lot of debris, definitely that type of option is should be enough. But if you see that there's some sort of buildup or something like that, cleaning it with non-toxic and vinegar would be an option. So I'm gonna go ahead and see if this video will play on how we can check for irrigation leaks. Hi, this is Brandon with the Chino Basin Water Conservation District, and today I'm going to be sharing some WaterWise tips for fix-it leak. Today's WaterWise tip is how to look and listen for a drip irrigation break. Let's go ahead and turn on our system and see what we find. Okay, now that we've turned on our system, we walked around and we hear in this area, something that sounds a little different. This is where we know to start looking for the leak. Because drip tubing is typically covered in mulch, you can't visually see. So as we peel back, we found a leak. This is a tiny tear in the tubing, which could easily be done with your shovel when you're out there gardening. But since it's hidden underneath the mulch, we wouldn't have known unless we look. Okay, so not sure how well that played, but basically the idea is we want to turn on our irrigation system and walk the areas that we have drip, especially if it's been installed for a while. It's a way to be more in tune with our system, and again, one of the popular approaches to put the drip system, the grid system in, or the point source system in, and then cover it with some sort of mulch, whether it be bark mulch, it could be rocks if we have like a Southwest garden style. And by putting that on top of it, we're also keeping ourselves from being able to visually see drip tears, emitters coming apart, things like that. So if you haven't already, or if you were not on the webinar, I did a irrigation basic class similar to this. We didn't focus solely on drip irrigation, but we focused on home irrigation as a whole. And I went over how to check your landscape. Same thing applies for drip irrigation, but to start a drip irrigation evaluation, we need to go to the timer if we have a timer. I know some of you have the option of a hose bib, so you would turn the hose bib on. So we have the option to manually run on our controller if you're not comfortable with turning your controller on. You can also go to the irrigation valve. So this is a anti-siphon valve seen at most homes. So you're able to turn the solenoid. That's where the wiring are coming out of. You can turn that a quarter turn. It'll initiate the valve. Or there's a little bleed screw where you can turn that. Water is going to come out. Just turn it, maybe halfway, and that allows the pressure in the upper part of the valve to open, and then basically the valve turns on until we come back and close it down. And then another thing with drip irrigation, and this goes with anybody that's a DIYer, or maybe you don't have a gardener and you are the one who's in charge of your irrigation, to always have extra parts. This is a system that does not require gluing, but it is on the surface of most of the time on the surface of the soil, could be buried again by mulch or rock, depending on the look that you want. But they are plastic pieces. Could be as easy as stepping on it or kicking it, or when you're doing some gardening, you can easily cut the tubing. So always want to keep extra parts when dealing with maintenance. So looking for breaks. So what happened here? So this was one of the residents that we looked at, that we did an evaluation for. And we turned the zone on, and all we heard was very high pitch, sound like a fountain just turned on. And this is a drip system. This is when pressure regulation is paramount. So this is a adapter that's connected where the irrigate or where the pop-up used to be. This was not regulated down to the 30 psi that's recommended. You can see here's a button emitter, and the tubing was just blown apart. So the pressure here, when tested, was around 90 psi, right? So this system is designed to operate around 30 psi. It was triple that amount, and you can see, so now we were just flooding out this shrub in this area. So pressure regulation is paramount when it comes to drip irrigation. So what happened here? So this was a commercial site that had the inline drip tubing in a grid, but this was an area where the workers would hang out and take their breaks, and somebody just stepped on and broke a fitting. And the system, when it comes on, so now the entire drip system is not operating, all the water is coming out in one area, and who knows how long the system was broken like this. A lot of stress on the plants in the other areas, and so this was definitely an area where it was very unnoticed that there was a break. So what happened on this one? So this one, there is actually nothing wrong. So this is actually, I wanted to put this one in here because I know that I've been talking mostly about inline grids and drip emitters in the inline tubing on grids. But this is an example of where point source, so there's only emitters towards the plants, where this worked very well. You can see they put DG, as decomposed granite, as a mulch. They put that on top of the tubing. It kind of wore out in this area. We can see the solid tubing, but with an area like this is it does have its applications where it works well. So with that, before I get into irrigation scheduling, I wanted to take another quick break. So we're getting towards the end of this presentation. We're going to go over irrigation scheduling and how to schedule a drip irrigation system. So let's go ahead and take another quick 5-minute break. Again, if there's any questions or comments, please feel free to do those. I can answer them when we get back, and then also at the end presentation. Okay, so let's get back to it. Okay, so we have one question. Let's see if we could answer that. Would you recommend having a home wood chipper? We have a 60-year-old giant maple tree plus smaller mature trees plus many 2-year-old trees and more fruit trees to be planted. I compost using scraps and combined with neighbors' lawn mowing clippings. Um, a home wood chipper is definitely a luxury to have, I would say. That would provide bark mulch. It would be less, it's more sustainable, I would say, than having a tree trimming company deliver mulch to you. But if that is something that you think would be very useful to you, that is always an option. If you are going to be removing trees, or if you trim your trees and prune your trees a lot, having a home wood chipper is always a viable option. But definitely not a necessity. Um, but I don't think I would recommend necessarily to have that, but if you do have the option to do that and the ability to buy one of those, as well as the green waste load that would make that beneficial for your site, I would applaud you. Okay, so with that, I'm going to get into the last section, which is irrigation scheduling. So what do we need to know when we're thinking about an irrigation schedule? This is one of the highlights, I believe, when we do our irrigation evaluations or landscape evaluations, both for commercial sites and homeowners, is we, based on the type of irrigation system, so the delivery, so the application rate, and opposed to the soil and the plant material, we give a very educated guess, I would say, a very educated guess on how much water or how much time you need to run each zone. So what do we need to know to have sort of knowledge or that sort of clarity? Well, first we need to understand the weather. A fancy word that us horticulturalists use is evapotranspiration. So it's evaporation and transpiration. So evaporation from the soil surface, transpiration through the plants. So basically plants opening up their pores and allowing water to go through to cool themselves off. So a form of sweating, I guess you could say. And then understanding precipitation. So precipitation meaning rain. I know that it's been a while in Southern California since we've had any of this in abundance, but when we think of precipitation, we also should think of irrigation, because essentially what we're doing with irrigation is we're trying to replace rain or precipitation. And we're doing that depending on what the plant needs. So with going through that, so we have what's called the bell curve. So this is water needs throughout the year. So June, July. So in July, early July to mid July is the warmest time of the year here in Southern California. And so as particular plants, as the summer comes along, we need to water more, obviously, than we do in December. If you are a native plant enthusiast, we all know that native plants are adapted not to have summer water. So if we did water extra, that would be detrimental to the plant. if that's something that you're curious about, please go to our YouTube site and look at our previous webinars. We have quite a few taught by Scott Kleinrock, our conservation programs manager, who has a lot of knowledge on native plants. Right, and also weather, it depends on where you're from. I saw that quite a few of you are from our Inland Empire area, but there were some that were from a different state or maybe LA County. So depending on where you live, more coastally, your curve is going to be a lot smaller. We all are kind of aware of curves in politics right now, right? Or not politics, but of flattening the curve for the COVID-19. So this is our weather curve. So the farther you are, so San Francisco's at the bottom. You see they have a much more flatter curve. Riverside, Palm Springs, of course, it's way more arid and the heat. So they have a larger curve. So understanding where you're from. And our goals for irrigation is basically to have as much water held in our soil for the longest period of time. There are factors outside of irrigation like soil health and root zone availability that go into it, but primarily the goal is to have as much or understand how much water is available to our plants. And so with this graph on the left, we have saturation. So this is these are our soil particles. So when we irrigate or when it rains, anytime that there's water being delivered to the soil, we have what's called saturation point, where it's completely filled and then the water is going to move through. So if anybody has potted plants, it's a little bit easier to know or to visualize, I should say. When we fill up our potted plants, the soil is going to absorb what it can absorb, and then all of a sudden the water is going to start coming out the bottom of our potted plant. That's what happens every time we irrigate, right? That's called gravitational water. Water is just going to pass through, and we want to limit that water that's passing through. And then we have what's called field capacity. So field capacity is when the water that's moved through has moved through, and what's the water that's being held in the soil that's beneficial to the plants is when we're at field capacity. And then the other term in soil science that we use is wilting point. So this is when there's no more water available to the plant. So our goal is to be in between wilting point and saturation. We want to maintain field capacity. Right, and there's also other ways for us to figure out how our water is being delivered in our zone, because again, we need to know how quickly in inches per hour the water is being delivered or gallons per minute, so that we can actually figure out how long I need to run. Because again, that's always the question. Well, how long should I run my drip irrigation? I've seen where people have installed drip irrigation as a retrofit, and they still keep the same irrigation schedule as their grass. So they're only watering their drip, 10 minutes a day, 5 times a day during summer, or sorry, 5 times a week during summer. And that's not going to get the penetration that a drip system needs. So here's some ways to calculate that. So emitter flow rate in gallons per hour. So for us, we were saying that ours is 0.6 gallons per hour times 231.1, which is a conversion factor. Then we have lateral row spacing in inches, and then emitter spacing in inches. So 12 inches and 18 inches. So depending on the design that you have, you plug it into that equation and you can figure out how many inches per hour your irrigation system is running. And you can do the same thing, irrigated area in square feet, emitter flow rate in gallons per hour times 2.4, which is a conversion factor, and do it that way as well to get the gallons per minute. for your zone. And you could say, oh, okay, great, Brian, but what does this all mean? These are a bunch of numbers. I'm a plant person. What does that mean? So once we're able to design properly, you can see we have our spacing set. We have our emitters, which are consistent because that's how the material is put in. Our headers is spaced properly. What do we need to know? So why do plants even need water? So that's the one thing. Why do plants even need water? So transpiration is a huge proponent of that. So about 97 to 99% of the water needs of a plant is due through transpiration. So basically the plant sweating. So the larger the leaves, that's why drought tolerant plants are adapted to a drier climate. They'll have smaller leaves, waxy leaves, hairy leaves, maybe a grayer color, upright plant or upright leaf growth to kind of get away from the sun, because the more sun that's on these plants, on these leaves, the more that it needs to transpire to get through that. So the goal is to replace the water in the soil that the plant is pulling up and transpiring. So now, how do I even know what that number is? Well, there's a very, very handy in California. It's called CIMMYS, so California Irrigation Management Information Systems. So CIMMYS, if you type in your browser CIMMYS, there's roughly 300 weather stations. So the one that I'm highlighting today is Chino. So if you're local to the area, that's actually in Chino Prison, in an open area over turf grass. And this is recording up to the minute weather data. This one was installed, I want to say around 2018. So it's been over almost 2 years, probably maybe over 2 years. And so we have 2 years of data. You can run reports either daily, this is monthly, yearly. So this is from the past year. And the number that we're looking for is that ETO, or evapotranspiration. This is the number that's calculated that we look at when we're trying to do our irrigation schedule. There's a lot in here: precipitation, soil, air temperature, minimum, maximum, humidity. A lot of good information, but we're mainly just focused on the total evapotranspiration. So there's, depending again on your area, they're all throughout California. You're able to see the location, and you want to get the one that's closest to the area that you're doing your either renovation or installation. So here was a daily report that I got from CIMMYS as well. So you can see for ET, it gives me every single day. So if you're familiar with smart timers or Wibix, weather-based irrigation controllers, they're getting this data every single day and adjusting your irrigation system. But the total for the entire month of July, so this last month, was 8.63, and that's in inches. So what that means is basically 8.63 inches, so a little over 8.5 inches of moisture left our soil because of the weather. So again, going back to plant type. So this is another part to think about. So I'm using low water because we're using the native hedge area that we're covering, that we did the installation for. But if you're looking at renovating your shrub area, moderate water area, you would use a different calculation. So you'd use 50% or 0.5 of ET. High water use, again, turf is the highest, some tropicals, things like that. But for this calculation that we're going to try to figure out, we're looking at low water needs because we're doing a native shrub. And another thing that's paramount is understanding our application rate. So I know I've talked about this quite a few times, but when we install properly, I should say, when we properly install an inline drip grid, we have the ability to know what the application rate is. So that means how quickly is that water being delivered in inches per hour to the soil, to the plant material, to whatever it is that we're watering. So when we look at point source, it's really hard to understand what the application rate is and how to evenly know how long to water. So that's why I suggest, if you're going to be doing drip irrigation, the inline drip with the grid system allows you to know the proper application rate, which is paramount when scheduling, and you'll see why. So now with that, what do we know? So looking at for the last month, if I want to figure out what my schedule should be for the peak season, so the hottest time of the year, which is July, in our area, what's our weather data look like? So I know our ETO, so our evapotranspiration rate, is 8.63 inches. And again, I got that from the CIMIS station in Chino. My plant factor, or my plant categorization, is 0.3 because that's at low. And then I know, because we installed properly and have the manufacturer tells us that our application rate is 0.65 inches per hour. Okay. Now what? So now we can start doing a calculation. So for a basic irrigation schedule, and again, this is just a very basic one. You can do a lot more factors, but at a basic level, trying to figure out how much I should water, we need to do weather data, which is the information we got from CIMIS, times the plant factor, and that's going to give us water needs for our plants. Right, so that's 8.63, which we got from CIMIS, times 0.3, which is our low water use plants, and that gives us 2.59 inches. Okay, now what? Well, now we take that water needs and we divide by the application rate, which we got from the manufacturer, multiplied by 60 to give us minutes. $239 minutes. Okay. So that means that for the entire month of January, we needed to run roughly 240 minutes. Do we run that all at once? What do we do? There's a term called time to runoff. So time to runoff is basically how long can I run my system before the water starts puddling up and running off site. So for our area, for drip irrigation, because again, drip irrigation is very slow delivery of water. Very slow delivery of water. So the time to runoff is going to be a lot higher. So a lot more minutes. Depending on your site, if you're on a slope, this number could be a lot smaller. But for our system here, and is 60 minutes. So then, okay, so we know that we can run the system for 60 minutes. The majority of that water, if not all that water, is going to be absorbed in the soil. So what does that mean for my schedule? We take the total runtime in minutes, which was 239 minutes, and we divide it by the time to runoff, and that tells me 4 hours. Okay, so now we have other options, right? So you can see how much research we've gone through to figure this, to come this far, when a lot of people just always ask, well, how long do we run the system? I have a drip system, how long do we run? Well, it depends. This is the work behind it depends. So for the month of July, for this shrub area, for a low water shrub or a drought tolerant shrub area, or even a drought tolerant area in general, 4 hours means we would make that into 1 hour per week if the plant or the plants are able to take that amount of water. So that's the basic calculation. So if we go back, we need to know the weather data for we can do this weekly. This is for the entire month of July. So we can do weekly, daily, preferably with drip irrigation. We don't do daily, but we can do weekly, monthly. The plant factor, that completely depends. If you are looking at vegetables, you can do more like a 1.0 to a 0.8, which would increase the amount of time you would need to run. But understanding weather data, plant factor, so what category does my plant fall into? High, medium, low, very low, and then definitely what's my application rate. So we need to know how many inches per hour my system is being delivered. So again, when you have point source, it's a lot. It's a little difficult to understand exactly what your application rate, especially if you have adjustable drip systems where, like the example with the micro sprays, you can adjust them from 0 to 13 gallons per hour, knowing exactly how much water is coming out or the application rate. And again, if you have any questions about any of this, we will also be posting a PDF of the presentation. And with anything, I always thought it was kind of a little funny to me anyway, is, we can throw all these numbers and do all that and put all these answers to Mother Nature, but Mother Nature always wins, right? So we always need to allow room for adjustment. If we do these calculations, that'll get us in the ballpark, but that might be too much water. That might not be enough water. This is a picture of a soil probe. I don't expect anybody to go out and buy a soil probe, but I mean, you could dig into the soil, check moisture with your hand. You can use a probe like this. So this takes out what's called a core, so a section of soil. We can check root zone depth. We want to check how much moisture is in the soil, if things look dry, if things are overwatered. Great tool to have. You can also, again, use a spade shovel. You can use, I've used a screwdriver before, kind of poke around and see how the soil level, the moisture level is in the soil. And with that, I'll open it up to any questions. So if anybody has any questions, but before we do the questions, I wanted to do the second poll. So I'm going to launch the second poll. And during that time, if anybody can think of any questions, please send them on in. And if you could do the exit poll, I would be much appreciated. Okay, thank you all for doing that exit poll. Okay, and before I get to the questions, I just wanted to thank everybody for being on the call with us today, as well as upcoming workshops. So today is the August 15th that we're all on, but we have August 20th and the September 10th for landscape transformation basics. So that's a Thursday evening class. And if you're thinking about doing turf removal or just a redesign, that is a great class that we do every month, hosted by Scott Kleinrock. A California native garden design on the 12th, which is the Saturday. Following Saturday, irrigation troubleshooting and maintenance, which I will be doing, which will be a little interesting to try to do that over a webinar, but trying to get into the nitty gritty of irrigation troubleshooting and maintenance. And then October 3rd, retrofitting lawn sprinklers for Waterwise Gardens. So if you are thinking about doing retrofitting, maybe, like I said, lawn turf removal or just redoing your front lawn or backyard, great class on just specifically how do I change my irrigation system to meet those demands. Great class. Looking forward to that one as well. October 17th, installation and establishment of California native and waterwise gardens. And then November 7th, fruit trees for home gardens. And we have, I want to say, close to 10, if not more than 10, of these workshops available on demand. Again, that's cbwcd.org/YouTube. So everything that has been live streamed is you can find there. And then I'm going to go to the last slide, which is my information. Again, if anybody wants to email me with specific questions or just anything, I will get to them. So with that, I'm going to go to the question. So the first question, does LA County have a department similar to yours? I am not sure. Not that I've found. We are kind of a very unique special district where we're able to just focus on water conservation and end user interaction, meaning homeowners or commercial sites. So anybody that's using water basically on landscapes, that is kind of our focus. So we are very grateful to be that being our main focus, but I'm not sure as far as what's available in LA County for you. But we are available, especially on demand. Okay, so next question. I would like to hang my irrigation so it is misting my tropicals. Will this work for the system you were speaking of? So for misting tropicals, in regards to an irrigation system, a drip irrigation system, the low volume approach would work, I would think, best, because high pressure and misting, most of that water is not going to reach your tropicals. But I would look at the micro irrigation, I guess would be the best bet would be to look into micro irrigation on a drip system, if that would work best for you. So hopefully that gave you kind of an idea. The next one, can you recommend a reputable drip irrigation specialist in Los Angeles? I cannot, because I don't necessarily know that area too well, Gabriel, but I would start with contacting, depending on what area of Los Angeles you are, contacting some of the irrigation supply houses. I know there's Ewing Irrigation everywhere in Southern California, or just look up irrigation supply houses. They work with more they work more intently with contractors, so I'm sure that they have a preferred list. So I would start there. The next one is, I have NetFM tubing. I'm not sure how many gallons per hour the emitter rate is. Is there a way to find out? Great question, Diane. So there is, you can look on the tubing itself. It's probably, depending on how old it is or how long it's been in the ground, very hard to see. But if I had to guess, it would probably be 0.9 gallons per hour at 12 foot, 12 inch emitter spacing. That would kind of give you the idea, because 99%, I would say, of the commercially installed or residential installed NetFM is 0.9 gallons per hour. There are ways to do that. If you want to look back at last week's efficient irrigation for fruit trees and vegetable gardens, there's instructions on how to actually capture that water with a drip system and then measure to figure out exactly what your emitter rate is. But if I had to guess, I would say it was 0.9 gallons per hour. Okay, next one. I'm planning a 50-foot by 12-foot succulent bed. What type of irrigation would you recommend? Live in the hot San Fernando Valley. No shade in that area yet. Okay, great question. So for Southwest garden, so like a succulent bed here, in our demonstration garden, we have that area on overhead spray. So just pop-ups that pop 12 inches up, and then we have a highly efficient nozzle, which is an MP rotating nozzle, to deliver water, over that area. But it can be done with drip irrigation, absolutely, depending on how dense your succulent garden is going to be installed. So like, I'm assuming you're probably going to have quite a bit of space in between the succulents. A point source irrigation system can work there, but not necessarily the best way to go. I mean, honestly, if it was up to me in a design, I would do an overhead irrigation system that could apply water, once a month during the hot times, something like that. But if installed correctly, and look at the manufacturer's specifications, a point source would be a benefit to you in that scenario over the inline drip, because of how far your plants are going to be spread out. Okay, next one is, do you have a class for water audit for drip system? We do not have one specifically for drip irrigation, but I do teach a professional class called QUEL, which is Qualified Water Efficient Landscaper. And we do go over irrigation auditing. We do talk a little bit about doing it for drip systems. The thing with irrigation audits is you're trying to figure out distribution uniformity, how like evenly the water is being distributed, where in drip systems, it's not as much. If it's installed correctly, I should say. If it's installed correctly, it's not as much of an issue. But figuring out flow rate, and then if the water is actually being put out of the emitters in the same rate, is something. But there is an organization called the Irrigation Association, and they do have a certification and a class that's specifically for drip irrigation auditing. So hopefully that helps out. Okay, is there anything else? I think that's all we got. So unless there's anything else, if anybody wants to send me an email, or if anybody has any questions, please type them in. If not, I'm going to go ahead and this one done. So thank you everybody for for being here with us on this Saturday. I know there's a lot of things that you could have been doing. Very appreciate you guys logging in with us and chatting with us. So hope to see you guys at another workshop, another upcoming workshop. And with that, I'll say goodbye to everyone.